Hello once again, everyone. And first off, relatively big-ish news. So, of course, Happy New Year. We're now in 2023. And thank you all very much because we have hit the 1,000 subscriber mark, which I really did not expect to ever get to. So, thank you all very, very much for those of you who've been watching, commenting, and enjoying the content. I will be making more of it, of course. I'm not going to just go, woo, 1K and be done. But expect to see more of the series that I was working on coming back in New Year as I am able to. But besides just this little thank you message, I also wanted to talk about something that I haven't talked about before, which is I wanted to talk about the SPES Heavies a bit. Now, this is not meant to be a gear review, per se, because one, at this point, Heavies are pretty much standard across at least the longsword board, and I really don't think there's anything better for it. But I was looking at them the other day, and I have my original pair of Heavies, which I've got on my lap right now, and then also quite a few people in the school now have the newer pair of Heavies, which I can get my hands into and thus talk about. I just want to talk about the evolution as well as my personal experience as it went on. So firstly, let's talk about the original Heavies. Now, I will say mine look quite beat up. They're not actually as bad as they look. I was the first person in my school to get a pair of these. So that was the VAF, and that was back before my first long point. So that would have been, I want to say, either 2014 or 2015. I could be wrong on that. Either way, it was a long time ago, over 10 years. And I remember when they first came out, it was like, wow, these are brand new. These are so exciting. I thought they made my hands look like cannonballs because they were so big. The main features that this generation had was it's got the kind of more of a cloth glove. It's got relatively large cuffs with a lot of pieces. How many does it have? It has 6 sections there. The buckles are relatively robust and all of that good stuff, and then the thumb was very simple. Now, I have seen some of these Heavies break, and in fact mine, what happened very early on was that the rivets here on the back got hit and popped, which is why, if you look, since the tape is molded away, you'll notice that's not the original rivets. These are the original rivets. So my father and I re-riveted them, and that's when I started covering my Heavies in tape. Not only just because it makes them look like mine, and it also does actually dampen the sound when they get hit, but it protects those rivets, and that goes a long way to the longevity of your Heavies. I need to retape these, obviously. But the other thing that kind of wore down or more immediately wore down, was the elastic that holds these together. So the way that this is constructed is basically just a glove. And then around that glove, you have the plates that are pointed to it, quite literally. It's just ties coming off these distinctive points, and then you got a belt that goes around the middle, and that's what keeps it to the cuff. Well, those points, they're most all the ones on this hand I think I've replaced. In fact, that one needs retying, but they're nylon, which means that they can slip, they can get hit and bust, things along those lines. So a lot of them I replaced with just kind of all manner of whatever I had laying around. Some people replace them with zip ties. Some people replace them with fishing wire or wax string. One of the ones on this one is actually wax string, and that went a long way to kind of giving this some longevity. The next thing that kind of started to happen was, of course, and it's more apparent on my right hand, is that the core, so basically in these plates you've got a strip that is holding it back, and that's what the rivet goes through. Those can pop, and then it's floating free slightly. Not a huge issue because there's enough overlap that you're relatively safe. But that was one of the other things that would happen. Then finally, the palms started wearing down after a lot of use. And what I'm going to do with these guys is, as you can see, what my father and I did is we took bits of, I think that's elk, and just glued it on to the areas that I'd worn through. Well, what we're going to do is I'm going to go ahead and strip the interior of the glove out and replace that with just leather and see if we can't give these some more longevity, because honestly, even though they lack some of the bells and whistles of the later model, as we will see, they're still fantastic. I'm okay with giving up some of the advantages that the later models have for a bit more feeling, a bit more mobility, as I never found these terribly restrictive. I do find some of the newer Heavies to be a bit more restrictive, so coupled with also, I've been doing this for a long enough time, I don't really get cracked on the hands all that badly anymore, so I didn't necessarily mind the lack of thumb protection. Now, the next pair of Heavies that I have, these are the ones that I currently use. These are, we'll call them Gen 2. The big improvement that this one got is the glove is now different. It's a little bit coarser, but it's the same general design, was the adding of blast caps. Now, there were two different things you could do. You could actually get them separately and attach them to your old Heavies, but then they started putting them in. It's just 3 bits of hard, I think it's foam of some kind. I'm not sure. And I'm talking like, modeling foam level difficulty, but that was put over the tip of the thumb, which gives you significantly more protection, because that's where most people got injured, is because of the size of the Heavies, the thumb slightly sticks up, chops would come down, blow open the thumb, and so putting that cap there does eliminate that possibility. It does make the thumb slightly more bulky, but that's not a huge issue. The material, this one only has 5 actually, so they dropped the extra 6th plate. They made them a little longer, if I'm not mistaken. Let me throw in my other pair to compare that, actually. So I basically put them all side by side. Yeah, the cuff got a lot longer. These are the same size. They also got a little bit, I think, thicker on the back of the hand, because this does come back up a bit more. The ties are still the same. The rivets are still the same. The material's changed a little bit. But beyond that, relatively minor additions. I resisted getting a new pair of Heavies for a long time, because really, I mean, my old pair was working just fine for the most part, and there was nothing revolutionary going on, so I wasn't terribly worried. I only started noticing the thumb cap in my own students getting them as they went. But this was just, again, nothing bad, nothing detracting at all. It just slight improvement over the old design. Still plenty of mobility, nothing too complicated there, easy to go in a thumb grip, etc. The ties are probably the most annoying part on these, because they're just tied on, so they can come apart. Actually, there's a difference I hadn't noticed before. So if we look here at the part wherein my thumb joins with the crook of my hand, we see we now have an elastic band, which technically I think allows my hand to open further than this guy. But the consequence of that is that there's a bigger gap, which is interesting. I can't necessarily say whether or not that makes that's the difference also, is that there's leather underneath here, a bigger piece of leather on my thumb, versus this is just the plates and they're riveted lower down, which might have longer term consequences and might be why this was so robust. So there's an interesting difference for you that I only just noticed. So a little bit slightly more stripped down design, probably due to just, manufacturing, etc. But still robust, great, does their job. Nothing to really complain about, especially once I broke them in. But probably the biggest differences you'll see is that now we have the new Heavies. And these have only come out within, really only about the past 2 or 3 years. I'll never forget also when they just kind of came out of nowhere. So these are my father's Heavies, which is why they're shiny and new. But basically what happened is there was this new thumb that I originally saw on the SPES lobsters, which were, I don't remember what their actual name was, but it was some alternative to the Heavy. And one of my students got one of these, and I was like, damn, that thumb is a great idea. Why don't they do that on the Heavies? And then they started doing it on the Heavies, and the HEMA world kind of exploded. So right now there's a bit of a flood of people trying to get rid of their old pair so they can buy the new pair, and it's rather hilarious. So the big evolution is now these new thumb caps, which, I mean, I can't blame anyone because gear is evolving as it goes, but I'm kind of amazed it took us this long to come up with this. They are undoubtedly superior to the blast cap because they keep the thumb profile small. They encompass most of it like a fingertip protection, and they're not bulky really at all. I've not played with these super extensively, but from what I've seen, they seem to work just fine. Ties are still the same. Not much difference in that regard. The rivets are different now. They're this silvery color. I don't know if it's a different rivet or if it's just they've gotten a different color from there. Otherwise, the construction seems relatively the same. How many are we up to now? We're still on 5 plates. I have seen this stitching here rip a little bit because it is just stitched, this little pleather cover, as opposed to these were, felt covered all the way and they were a little more robust. Yeah, beyond that, not too many changes. Really, it's the thumb that makes these revolutionary. And I think that probably there really isn't much I would add to the Heavy at this point. I mean, for the most part, with this new thumb, everything's kind of where you'd want it. I'd still recommend putting tape. Oh, actually, there's another change. This now curls down a little bit more compared to My original pair was basically flat, so right where I'm looking is essentially right here where the plates intersect. This was pretty much flat. This, let's see, curls a little bit, but this has a bit more of a dramatic curl to it, making it so it's harder for a point to get up into there, which will also probably help with the longevity, because that means that the area where it's riveted is not under as much duress, which will be good. And then there's a little more curve down here. But like I was saying, I don't necessarily anticipate many more changes happening. Still recommend taping the back to protect those rivets, because they're gonna get hit, so you might as well. Plus, they mark them as your own, which is good because all Heavies look pretty much identical. Yeah, I don't really see any changes happening to the glove or anything along those lines in the near future. For the most part, I think they'll probably stay about as they are. Now, I don't know whether or not this is a terribly fascinating video for people to see. If you just stuck around to hear my thanks, by all means, that's great. But I just kind of wanted to talk through it because, one, I happen to finally have 3 pairs of Heavies just sitting around of the 3 different generations. And you'll also probably see, once I get around to doing it in future videos, how my old pair will look a little bit different and the modifications I will make therein. But really, you can't go wrong with the Heavies. I know also sparring gloves, etc. are popular, and they do just fine. I never personally felt great in them, but it's come a very long way, and it's super interesting as someone who's been in this community for, I'm in my 13th year of doing this, to see how much gear has evolved, and what now seems so obvious has a long time coming in some regards, and also how some features have altered that you may never notice. Like, for example, that leather on the back there, that really makes, I think will make a significant difference in the longevity of that thumb. But either way, once again, thank you all very, very much for watching. Expect more of the sword swingy type content soon. And otherwise, we shall go over some other techniques another time.